Sarah Martinez stepped off the military transport bus at Fort Braxton with her duffel bag slung over her shoulder and determination written across her face. The early morning sun cast long shadows across the training grounds, and the sound of drill sergeants barking orders echoed through the air. At 22 years old, she had dreamed of this moment since she was a little girl watching her grandfather polish his military medals at the kitchen table. The other recruits around her looked nervous, some barely out of high school with baby faces and wide eyes. Sarah had taken a different path to get here. While her classmates had gone straight to college or the military after graduation, she had spent 4 years working multiple jobs to support her sick mother and younger brother. Those years had hardened her in ways that showed in her steady gait and the quiet confidence she carried herself with. As they lined up for initial processing, whispers and snickers began to ripple through the group. Sarah was one of only 3 women in a platoon of 30 recruits, and she could feel the skeptical glances directed her way. Her appearance didn't help matters. Standing at 5'4" with a slight build, she looked like she might blow away in a strong wind. Her long dark hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and her uniform seemed to hang loose on her frame. "Look at that one," muttered Jake Thompson, a tall recruit from Texas with broad shoulders and an arrogant smirk. "She looks like she belongs in a library, not a battlefield." Several other recruits chuckled at his comment, and Sarah felt their eyes boring into her back. Marcus Williams, another recruit who had played football in college, shook his head dismissively. "I give her 2 weeks before she washes out." "This isn't summer camp, sweetheart," he said loud enough for her to hear. Sarah kept her eyes forward and her mouth shut. She had heard worse comments while working construction jobs to pay the bills. These boys had no idea what real hardship looked like, and she wasn't about to waste her breath explaining it to them. The processing line moved slowly as each recruit went through medical checks, equipment distribution, and paperwork. When it was Sarah's turn at the medical station, the Army medic, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, noticed something that made her pause. "Roll up your sleeve," the medic instructed for the standard vaccination check. Sarah hesitated for just a moment before rolling up her left sleeve. As the fabric moved up her arm, an intricate tattoo became visible. It wasn't the typical butterfly or flower that might be expected from a young woman. Instead, it was a detailed military insignia surrounded by dates and coordinates. The design was professionally done, with sharp lines and precise details that spoke of significance rather than teenage rebellion. The medic studied the tattoo with interest but said nothing, making notes on her clipboard before moving on to the next part of the examination. Sarah quickly pulled her sleeve back down, but not before a few other recruits had caught a glimpse. "Great! The bookworm's got ink," Jake whispered to his buddies. "Probably got it to try to look tough." What they didn't know was that the tattoo held more meaning than any of them could imagine. The coordinates marked a place halfway around the world where a helicopter had gone down in enemy territory. The dates commemorated lives lost and sacrifices made. It wasn't a symbol of rebellion or an attempt to appear tough. It was a memorial, a promise, and a reminder of why she was there. The next few hours were a blur of equipment distribution and orientation briefings. Sarah received her gear, found her assigned bunk in the women's barracks, and began the process of transforming from civilian to soldier. The physical demands would come later, but already she could sense the social challenges that lay ahead. During the first mess hall gathering, the unofficial hierarchy among the recruits began to establish itself. The bigger, more athletic men naturally gravitated toward leadership roles in their informal groups. Jake Thompson, with his football background and natural charisma, quickly became the unofficial spokesman for many of the male recruits. Marcus Williams, equally imposing, found himself in a similar position. Sarah sat quietly with the 2 other female recruits, Rachel Cohen and Amy Patterson. Rachel was a former track runner from California, lean and focused, with the discipline that came from years of competitive athletics. Amy was from a military family in North Carolina, and her knowledge of military culture and procedures made her a valuable source of information for the others. "Don't let them get to you," Amy advised as they picked at their evening meal. "Half these guys will wash out in the first month. The drill sergeants don't care how much you can bench press if you can't follow orders or work as part of a team." Rachel nodded in agreement. "I've dealt with guys like this my whole athletic career. They think because they're bigger or louder, they're automatically better. Most of the time, they're compensating for something. Sarah appreciated their support, but she had learned long ago that actions spoke louder than words. She would let her performance do the talking when the time came. That evening, as the recruits settled into their bunks for their first night at basic training, Drill Sergeant Rodriguez made his rounds. He was a compact man, with 20 years of military service behind him, and the kind of presence that commanded immediate attention. His voice could carry across a parade ground or drop to a whisper that somehow seemed more intimidating than shouting. "Listen up, recruits," he announced to the assembled group. "Over the next 12 weeks, some of you will discover strengths you never knew you had. Others will discover that military service isn't for them. Both outcomes are acceptable, as long as you give your maximum effort and respect your fellow soldiers." He paused, his eyes scanning the group before continuing. "I don't care what you did in your civilian life. I don't care if you were a star athlete or valedictorian or worked at a gas station. Here, everyone starts equal, and everyone earns their place through performance, dedication, and character. Some of you may be surprised by who emerges as a leader, and some of you may be disappointed to discover that your previous achievements don't automatically translate to military success." As if sensing the undercurrents of skepticism and prejudgment already flowing through the group, Rodriguez added, "I've seen 90-pound women outperform 200-pound men in combat situations. I've seen quiet introverts become exceptional leaders under pressure. Keep your assumptions to yourself and focus on your own development." Sarah caught the sergeant's eye for just a moment and saw something there that gave her hope. It wasn't sympathy or special consideration, but rather a recognition that performance and character mattered more than appearances or preconceptions. After lights out, the barracks settled into an uneasy quiet broken only by the occasional cough or whispered conversation. Sarah lay in her narrow bunk, staring at the ceiling and thinking about the journey that had brought her to this moment. Growing up in a small town in Arizona, she had been surrounded by military tradition. Her grandfather had served in Vietnam, her father in the Gulf War, and several uncles and cousins had worn the uniform at various times. But it wasn't family pressure that had driven her to enlist. Instead, it was a deep-seated belief that service meant something, that being part of something larger than herself would give her life meaning and purpose. The 4 years she had spent working after high school had taught her valuable lessons about perseverance, responsibility, and the dignity that came from honest work. While her peers had been enjoying college parties and spring break trips, she had been getting up before dawn to work construction sites, learning to operate heavy machinery, and discovering that she was capable of far more than her appearance suggested. Her mother's battle with cancer had been the defining experience of those years. Watching Maria Martinez fight with dignity and grace while undergoing chemotherapy and radiation treatments had shown Sarah what real strength looked like. It wasn't about physical size or loud declarations. It was about quiet determination, the ability to endure hardship without complaint, and the strength to keep moving forward when everything seemed hopeless. The tattoo on her arm was a tribute to more than just military service. It honored her grandfather's unit, which had been involved in a rescue mission that saved dozens of lives but cost the lives of several soldiers, including his best friend. She had researched the mission extensively, reading after-action reports and interviewing surviving veterans. The coordinates marked the landing zone where the rescue helicopters had touched down under enemy fire. For her grandfather, talking about the war had always been difficult, but in his final years, as Alzheimer's slowly stole his memories, he had found comfort in sharing stories about his military service with Sarah. Those conversations had planted the seeds of her own desire to serve, but they had also taught her about sacrifice, duty, and the bonds that connected soldiers across generations. Now, lying in the darkness of the recruit barracks, she could hear some of the male recruits still whispering among themselves, probably discussing their predictions for who would excel and who would fail. She knew her name was likely coming up in those conversations, probably accompanied by skeptical comments about her chances of success. Tomorrow would bring their first real day of training, and she was eager to begin proving herself. Not to silence the critics or win acceptance from those who had already judged her, but to honor the memory of those who had served before her, and to begin building her own legacy of service. The pre-dawn wake-up call came at 0500 hours sharp, accompanied by the sound of Drill Sergeant Rodriguez's whistle and his booming voice cutting through the darkness. "Rise and shine, recruits. You have exactly 15 minutes to be dressed, beds made, and standing at attention in formation." "Move, move, move!" The barracks erupted into controlled chaos as 30 recruits scrambled to get ready. Sarah had been awake for several minutes before the official wake-up call, a habit she had developed during her working years, when being late meant losing a day's pay. She moved efficiently through her morning routine, making her bed with hospital corners and checking her appearance in the small mirror above her locker. As the recruits stumbled out into the pre-dawn darkness, the differences in their backgrounds became immediately apparent. Some, like Amy Patterson, moved with the practiced efficiency of someone familiar with military procedures. Others, particularly those coming straight from civilian life, struggled with the pace and precision required. Jake Thompson, despite his athletic background, looked disheveled and annoyed at being awakened so early. His usual confident demeanor was replaced by the grumpy expression of someone who wasn't accustomed to functioning before sunrise. Marcus Williams seemed better prepared, but even he was clearly adjusting to the regimentation that would define the next 12 weeks of their lives. The first formation was a study in contrasts. Some recruits stood straight and tall, eyes forward and bodies at attention. Others swayed slightly on their feet, still fighting off the effects of sleep deprivation and disorientation. Sarah found her place in the formation and waited silently for instructions. Drill Sergeant Rodriguez emerged from the administrative building carrying a clipboard and wearing the same intimidating expression that had greeted them the night before. He walked slowly along the formation, studying each recruit as if memorizing their faces and assessing their potential. "Today begins your transformation from civilians into soldiers," he announced, his voice carrying easily across the training area. "Some of you think you know what that means. You're wrong. Others are afraid of what lies ahead. That fear might serve you well if you use it to stay alert and focused." He paused in front of Jake Thompson, noting the recruit's slightly sloppy posture. "Military bearing begins with how you present yourself. If you can't stand at attention properly, how can I trust you to handle a weapon or follow orders in a combat situation?" Jake straightened immediately, but Rodriguez had already moved on, making mental notes about each recruit's attention to detail and ability to make quick corrections. When he reached Sarah's position in formation, he stopped for just a moment longer than with the others. His eyes took in her proper military bearing, the precision of her uniform, and the alert, focused expression on her face. He said nothing, but Sarah caught a barely perceptible nod before he moved on to the next recruit. The morning's first activity was physical training, starting with a diagnostic physical fitness test that would establish baseline measurements for each recruit's improvement over the course of basic training. The test consisted of push-ups, sit-ups, and a 2-mile run, with standards adjusted for age and gender but designed to challenge everyone. As they moved to the exercise area, the informal trash-talking among the male recruits began in earnest. Jake Thompson stretched his arms and cracked his knuckles dramatically. "Hope everyone's ready to see how it's done," he announced to no one in particular. Marcus Williams began doing practice push-ups, his form perfect and his movements smooth. "College football conditioning," he explained to the recruit next to him. "We did harder workouts than this every day." The physical training instructor, Sergeant First Class Johnson, was a woman in her 30s with the lean, muscular build of someone who had dedicated her life to fitness and military excellence. Her presence immediately changed the dynamic among the recruits, particularly the men who had been making assumptions about women in combat roles. "Gentlemen and ladies," she began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had earned respect through demonstrated competence. "Physical fitness is not about showing off or comparing yourself to others. It's about meeting the standards required to perform your duties effectively and to support your fellow soldiers when they need you most." She gestured toward the exercise stations that had been set up around the training area. "Today's test will establish where you are now. Over the next 12 weeks, you'll be pushed to improve not just your physical capabilities, but your mental toughness and your ability to perform under pressure." The push-up test came first, with recruits paired off to count repetitions for their partners. Sarah found herself paired with David Kim, a quiet recruit from Seattle who had a computer science degree and had enlisted for the technical training opportunities the military offered. He seemed nervous about the physical requirements, and she could see sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool morning air. When it was Sarah's turn to perform, she dropped into the starting position and waited for the command to begin. Her form was textbook perfect, learned during her years of construction work, where upper body strength had been essential for handling tools and materials. As the counting began, she settled into a steady rhythm, her movements controlled and precise. Around the exercise area, she could hear the grunts and heavy breathing of other recruits pushing themselves to achieve maximum repetitions. Jake Thompson was putting on a show, calling out his count loudly enough for everyone to hear, while Marcus Williams worked silently but with obvious intensity. Sarah focused on her own performance, blocking out the distractions and maintaining her steady pace. When the 2 minutes ended, David Kim announced her total with surprise in his voice. 47! It was a respectable score for anyone, male or female, and significantly higher than many of the male recruits had achieved. But Sarah showed no reaction to the number, simply moving on to prepare for the sit-ups portion of the test. The sit-ups proceeded similarly, with Sarah posting another solid score that quietly placed her in the top quarter of the group. But it was the 2-mile run that would provide the real test of endurance and mental toughness. As the recruits lined up at the starting line, Sergeant Johnson provided final instructions. This is not a sprint. Pace yourselves, support your fellow recruits, and remember that finishing is more important than your time on this diagnostic test. The starting whistle blew, and the group set off at various paces. Jake Thompson and several other athletic recruits shot out ahead, clearly intending to establish dominance early. Marcus Williams settled into a more measured pace, his football training having taught him the importance of pacing in longer efforts. Sarah started conservatively, finding a rhythm that she knew she could maintain for the full distance. Her construction work had required endurance more than speed, and she had learned to gauge her efforts carefully to avoid burning out before the job was done. As the first mile progressed, the early sprint by some recruits began to take its toll. Jake Thompson, who had built an early lead, began to slow noticeably as his breathing became labored. Others who had started too aggressively found themselves walking before reaching the halfway point. Sarah maintained her steady pace, gradually moving up through the field as others began to fade. She passed several male recruits who had underestimated the distance and were now paying the price for their early enthusiasm. Her breathing was controlled, her stride efficient, and her focus complete. Entering the second mile, the separation among the recruits became more pronounced. A small group of the strongest runners had pulled ahead, including Rachel Cohen, whose track background was evident in her smooth, efficient form. Behind them, Sarah continued her methodical advance through the field. With half a mile to go, she found herself running alongside Marcus Williams, who was struggling more than he had expected. His football conditioning had emphasized short bursts of intense activity rather than sustained endurance, and the longer distance was challenging him in unexpected ways. "Stay with me," Sarah said quietly as they approached a small hill that marked the beginning of the final quarter mile. "We'll get through this together." Marcus looked surprised by the encouragement but nodded gratefully. Together, they crested the hill and began the final push toward the finish line. Sarah could have pulled ahead easily, but instead she stayed with Marcus, providing the pacing and encouragement that helped him maintain his effort. They crossed the finish line together, both with times that placed them in the upper half of the group. As they caught their breath in the cool-down area, Marcus extended his hand to Sarah. "Thanks," he said simply. "I wouldn't have finished as strong without your help." Sarah shook his hand. "That's what teammates do." The comment was overheard by several other recruits, including Jake Thompson, who had finished well behind them after his early pace had proved unsustainable. The dynamic within the group was beginning to shift, though subtly and without dramatic announcements. As they returned to the barracks for showers and preparation for the next training event, conversations among the recruits reflected a new awareness of capabilities and character that didn't necessarily align with initial impressions. Sarah had quietly demonstrated physical competence, but more importantly, she had shown the kind of character and teamwork that military service demanded. The day's training continued, with classes on military history, weapons safety, and basic tactical principles. During these sessions, Sarah's attentiveness and thoughtful questions impressed the instructors and began to earn respect from her fellow recruits. Her years of work experience had taught her the importance of listening carefully to instructions and asking clarifying questions when necessary. During lunch, the seating arrangements in the mess hall reflected the evolving social dynamics within the platoon. Sarah found herself sitting with a mixed group that included Marcus Williams, David Kim, Rachel Cohen, and several other recruits who valued substance over swagger. "I keep thinking about what Sergeant Rodriguez said last night," David said as he picked at his meal, "about being surprised by who emerges as a leader. I'm starting to understand what he meant. Amy Patterson, who had joined their table, nodded in agreement. Military leadership isn't about being the loudest person in the room. It's about competence, character, and taking care of your people. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Jake Thompson, who had apparently decided to reassess his initial judgments. "Mind if I sit here?" he asked, looking slightly uncomfortable but determined. The group made room for him, and Jake settled into his seat with uncharacteristic humility. "I owe some people apologies," he said, looking directly at Sarah. "I made some assumptions that were wrong, and I acted like an ass. That's not the kind of person I want to be, and it's definitely not the kind of soldier I want to be." Sarah studied his face, looking for signs of insincerity or ulterior motives. What she saw was genuine embarrassment and a willingness to change course that spoke well of his character. "We all make mistakes," she replied. "What matters is what we do next." The afternoon brought their first introduction to weapons training, starting with basic rifle familiarization and safety procedures. The M4 carbine was the standard infantry weapon, and every recruit would need to demonstrate proficiency with it regardless of their future military specialty. Weapons Sergeant Torres, a career infantry soldier with multiple combat deployments, began the session with a sobering reminder about the responsibility that came with handling military weapons. This rifle is not a toy, it's not a prop, and it's not a symbol of how tough you are. It's a tool that can save lives or take lives, depending on how skillfully and responsibly you use it. He demonstrated the proper procedures for handling, loading, and firing the weapon, emphasizing safety protocols that had been developed through decades of military experience and, unfortunately, accidents caused by carelessness or overconfidence. When the recruits had their first opportunity to handle the rifles, the differences in their backgrounds again became apparent. Some, like Amy Patterson, who had grown up around firearms, handled the weapon with natural confidence. Others, particularly those from urban backgrounds with little exposure to guns, struggled with basic procedures. Sarah fell somewhere in the middle. She had limited experience with firearms, but her mechanical aptitude and careful attention to the instructor's demonstrations allowed her to master the basic procedures quickly. More importantly, she approached the weapon with the respect and caution that Sergeant Torres had emphasized. During the dry-fire exercises, where recruits practiced aiming and trigger control with unloaded weapons, Sarah's steady hands and patient approach produced consistently good results. She didn't rush through the exercises or try to show off, instead focusing on mastering the fundamentals that would serve as the foundation for more advanced training. Jake Thompson, despite his earlier bravado, struggled with the precision required for accurate shooting. His tendency toward rapid, forceful movements worked against him when handling a weapon that demanded smoothness and control. After several frustrating attempts, he looked around for help. "Sarah," he called out quietly, "can you show me what I'm doing wrong?" Several recruits turned to watch as Sarah moved to help Jake with his shooting position. She made small adjustments to his stance and grip, explaining the reasoning behind each change in simple, clear terms. "Don't think of it as forcing the rifle to do what you want," she advised. "Work with it. Let the weapon's design work for you instead of fighting against it." Under her guidance, Jake's performance improved noticeably. The transformation wasn't lost on Sergeant Torres, who had been observing the interaction from across the training area. As the day's training concluded and the recruits prepared for evening chow and personal time, the dynamics within the platoon had shifted significantly from the morning's formation. Initial impressions based on size, gender, or background had given way to a more nuanced understanding of each individual's capabilities and character. Sarah had not sought attention or recognition, but her consistent performance and willingness to help others had earned her a different kind of respect than the flashy displays that had characterized the early interactions among the recruits. She was becoming someone that others looked to for guidance and support, not because she demanded it, but because she had quietly demonstrated the qualities that military service required. That evening, as she cleaned her rifle and prepared for the next day's training, Sarah reflected on the progress that had been made. The skeptical comments and dismissive attitudes of the morning seemed like ancient history, replaced by a growing sense of mutual respect and shared purpose among the recruits. But she knew that the real tests lay ahead. Basic training was designed to push recruits beyond their comfort zones and force them to discover capabilities they didn't know they possessed. The physical and mental challenges would intensify, and the pressure to perform would increase with each passing week. As she had learned during her years of supporting her family through difficult times, respect had to be earned continuously through consistent performance and character. There would be no coasting on early successes or resting on the foundation she had begun to build. The tattoo on her arm served as a constant reminder of the standards she had set for herself and the legacy she hoped to honor through her service. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to prove herself worthy of the uniform she was learning to wear with pride. The second week of basic training brought with it a series of challenges that would test every aspect of the recruits' developing military skills. Sarah had established herself as a steady, reliable presence within the platoon, but she knew that maintaining that reputation would require continuous effort and adaptability as the training intensified. The week began with an unexpected announcement from Drill Sergeant Rodriguez during the Monday morning formation. "This week, we begin field training exercises," he declared, his voice carrying across the assembled recruits. "You'll be spending 3 days and 2 nights in the field, practicing the skills you've been learning in classroom settings." A ripple of excitement and nervousness passed through the formation. Field exercises represented a significant step up in the realism and difficulty of their training, and everyone knew that performance in the field would carry more weight in their overall evaluation than classroom test scores. "You'll be organized into squads of 6 recruits each," Rodriguez continued. "Squad leaders will be appointed based on demonstrated leadership potential and overall performance to this point. Squad members will be selected to create balanced teams that can support each other's development." Sarah felt a flutter of anticipation mixed with apprehension. Leadership positions in basic training were both an honor and a burden, offering opportunities to develop crucial skills while placing additional scrutiny on every decision and action. When the squad assignments were announced, Sarah found herself designated as the leader of Squad Bravo, with Marcus Williams as her assistant squad leader. Her team included David Kim, whose technical background would be valuable for communications and equipment management; Rachel Cohen, whose athletic conditioning and competitive drive would be assets in physically demanding situations; Amy Patterson, whose military family background provided knowledge of procedures and traditions; and surprisingly, Jake Thompson, who had requested assignment to her squad specifically. "I want to learn from someone who does things the right way," Jake had explained privately to Sarah after the assignments were posted. "I've been thinking about what you said about working with the rifle instead of fighting it, and I realize that attitude applies to a lot more than just shooting." The composition of Squad Bravo reflected Drill Sergeant Rodriguez's intention to create balanced teams. Sarah's squad combined different backgrounds, personalities, and skill sets in a way that would require effective leadership to mold into a cohesive unit. Their first challenge came during the initial equipment inspection and packing exercise. Each recruit was responsible for organizing their field gear according to strict military standards, with every item having a designated place and purpose. The packing list included everything from sleeping bags and rations to ammunition and medical supplies, all of which had to fit into regulation backpacks and load-bearing equipment. David Kim struggled with the physical weight of his loaded pack, which seemed to overwhelm his slight frame. Rachel Cohen had organized her gear with the precision of someone accustomed to athletic equipment management, but she lacked familiarity with some of the military-specific items. Amy Patterson moved through the process efficiently, her family background evident in her comfort with military procedures. Jake Thompson approached the task with uncharacteristic methodical care, double-checking each item against the packing list and asking questions when he wasn't certain about proper procedures. The transformation in his attitude from the first week was remarkable, and Sarah made a mental note to acknowledge his effort when appropriate. Marcus Williams, as assistant squad leader, helped coordinate the packing process and conducted buddy checks to ensure that everyone's gear was properly secured and accessible. His football background had taught him the importance of preparation and attention to detail, qualities that translated well to military operations. As squad leader, Sarah moved among her team members, providing guidance and encouragement while ensuring that military standards were maintained. She helped David redistribute some of the weight in his pack to make it more manageable, showed Rachel the proper way to secure certain pieces of equipment, and answered Jake's questions with patience and clarity. Remember, she told the squad as they completed their preparations, "We succeed or fail as a team. If one person falls behind or has equipment problems, it affects all of us. Look out for each other, and don't be afraid to ask for help when you need it. The march to the field training area was a 3-mile hike through varied terrain, including wooded areas, open fields, and several stream crossings. The loaded packs made the journey significantly more challenging than their previous training runs, and the need to maintain formation and proper spacing added another layer of complexity. Sarah set a sustainable pace for her squad, mindful of David's struggles with the heavy pack while ensuring that they met the time standards for the movement. She rotated positions within the formation, spending time with each squad member to assess their condition and provide encouragement. About halfway through the march, David began to fall behind despite his best efforts. The weight of his pack, combined with his limited physical conditioning, was taking a toll that threatened to slow down the entire squad. Without hesitation, Marcus Williams stepped up to take some items from David's pack, redistributing the weight among stronger team members. "That's what teamwork looks like," Sarah said approvingly, making sure the weight redistribution was done efficiently and safely. "We adapt to circumstances and support each other." The field training area was a carefully designed facility that replicated various combat and operational environments. Wooded areas provided concealment for tactical exercises, open fields allowed for movement training, and constructed obstacles simulated urban and battlefield conditions. It was here that the recruits would spend the next 3 days putting their classroom knowledge to practical use. Their first night in the field introduced them to the realities of military life outside the comfort of barracks and mess halls. Sleeping in individual tents, eating military rations, and maintaining security watches throughout the night challenged everyone's adaptability and endurance. Sarah established a watch schedule that balanced the need for security with ensuring that everyone got adequate rest for the next day's activities. She took the difficult midnight to 2 a.m. watch herself, using the quiet time to reflect on her squad's performance and plan for upcoming challenges. During her watch, she noticed movement in the area where Squad Alpha was positioned. Jake Thompson was quietly making rounds, checking on his former friends who were struggling with the field conditions more than they had expected. Despite being assigned to a different squad, he was still looking out for people he cared about. When he noticed Sarah observing him, Jake approached her position carefully, following proper noise and light discipline procedures. "Just making sure everyone's okay," he explained quietly. "Mike Peterson is having trouble with his gear, and I wanted to help him get sorted out." Sarah nodded approvingly. "Good thinking. Help him now so his problems don't become bigger issues tomorrow." The next morning brought their first major tactical exercise, a squad-level patrol through hostile territory with multiple objectives to accomplish. Each squad would operate independently, but their actions would be monitored and evaluated by training cadre who would create realistic scenarios and challenges. Squad Bravo received their mission briefing from Lieutenant Morrison, a young infantry officer who served as one of the training supervisors. The mission required them to move to a designated observation point, gather intelligence on simulated enemy positions, and return with their information while avoiding detection and responding appropriately to any enemy contact. As Sarah studied the map and developed her plan, she considered each squad member's strengths and how to best utilize them for mission success. David Kim would handle communications equipment and coordinate with the training cadre. Rachel Cohen's speed and agility made her ideal for scouting and reconnaissance tasks. Amy Patterson's knowledge of military procedures would be valuable for following proper protocols. Marcus Williams would serve as her tactical advisor and backup leader. Jake Thompson's size and strength made him suitable for carrying additional equipment and providing security. "Our success depends on moving carefully and thinking through each decision," Sarah briefed her squad before they departed. "This isn't about speed or showing off. It's about accomplishing the mission while keeping everyone safe." The patrol began before dawn, with the squad moving through wooded terrain using tactical movement techniques they had practiced in classroom settings, but were now applying in realistic conditions. Sarah led from the front, setting the pace and navigation while maintaining awareness of her team's condition and the surrounding environment. About an hour into the patrol, they encountered their first realistic challenge when training cadre, acting as enemy forces, established a checkpoint along their planned route. Sarah called a halt and gathered her squad to assess the situation and develop a course of action. "We have 3 options," she explained, sketching a rough map in the dirt. "We can try to sneak around to the left, which adds distance and time but keeps us concealed. We can go right, which is faster but more exposed. Or we can wait for the checkpoint to move, but that risks falling behind schedule." Rachel Cohen volunteered to scout the left route to determine its feasibility. Marcus Williams suggested that the right route might be acceptable if they moved during a scheduled aircraft flyover that would mask any noise they made. Amy Patterson reminded them that their mission orders emphasized intelligence gathering over speed, suggesting that patience might be the best approach. After considering all inputs, Sarah decided on a combination approach. Rachel would scout the left route while the rest of the squad observed the checkpoint to determine its patrol pattern. If the scout route proved viable, they would use it. If not, they would time their movement to the right during the aircraft flyover. The plan worked perfectly, with Rachel determining that the left route was feasible and the squad successfully bypassing the checkpoint without detection. Their methodical approach cost them some time, but it accomplished the mission requirements while maintaining operational security. At the observation point, the squad's different skills came together effectively. David Kim established communications with the training headquarters and reported their successful arrival. Rachel and Jake took turns observing the simulated enemy positions through binoculars, gathering the intelligence required by their mission. Amy Patterson recorded their observations using proper military reporting formats. Marcus Williams maintained security and monitored their withdrawal routes. Sarah coordinated the overall effort while maintaining situational awareness and preparing for the next phase of their mission. Her leadership style was collaborative and inclusive, seeking input from all team members while maintaining clear decision-making authority when needed. The intelligence-gathering phase revealed that the simulated enemy positions were stronger than their initial briefing had indicated, with additional defensive positions and more personnel than expected. This information would be valuable for follow-on missions by other squads, demonstrating the interconnected nature of military operations. As they prepared to withdraw from the observation point, the training cadre introduced an unexpected complication: simulated casualties. Marcus Williams was designated as wounded and unable to walk unassisted. Jake Thompson was classified as having a minor injury that limited his mobility but didn't prevent him from functioning. The casualty situation tested the squad's ability to adapt to changing circumstances and to prioritize the welfare of their team members over mission speed or convenience. Sarah quickly reorganized the squad to support the casualties while maintaining security and continuing their withdrawal. David Kim and Rachel Cohen took over Marcus's gear and responsibilities, while Amy Patterson provided medical care for the casualties following first aid procedures they had learned in training. Jake, despite his simulated injury, insisted on carrying his full load and helping with Marcus's equipment. The withdrawal took significantly longer than planned, but the squad maintained unit integrity and successfully evacuated their casualties while protecting the intelligence they had gathered. By the time they reached the rally point, they were exhausted but proud of their performance under challenging conditions. Lieutenant Morrison's after-action review highlighted both strengths and areas for improvement in the squad's performance. He praised their methodical planning, effective teamwork, and proper response to the casualty situation. He noted opportunities for improvement in communication procedures and navigation techniques. Squad Bravo demonstrated the kind of thinking and teamwork that missions require, he concluded. You adapted to circumstances, supported each other, and accomplished your objectives. That's exactly what we want to see. The second day of field training introduced more complex scenarios, including night operations, equipment failures, and leadership challenges designed to test each recruit's potential for greater responsibilities. During a night patrol exercise, Sarah's squad encountered a scenario where she was designated as captured, leaving Marcus Williams in command of the squad with limited guidance on how to proceed. This type of succession of command situation was common in military operations, and the ability of subordinate leaders to step up was crucial for mission success. Marcus initially struggled with the transition to full command responsibility, looking for Sarah's guidance despite her unavailability. But with encouragement from Amy Patterson and support from the rest of the team, he settled into the leadership role and successfully completed the modified mission. You did well, Sarah told him after the exercise concluded and she was released to rejoin the squad. Leadership isn't about having all the answers. It's about making the best decisions you can with the information available and trusting your team to execute. Jake Thompson's performance throughout the field training had been consistently strong, showing remarkable improvement from his early attitudes and demonstrating genuine leadership potential. During a squad reorganization exercise where roles were rotated, he took charge of a group that included David Kim, and 2 recruits from other squads who were struggling with field conditions. His approach combined encouragement with practical problem-solving, helping the struggling recruits redistribute their gear and adjust their techniques to better manage the physical demands. His transformation from the arrogant recruit of the first week to a supportive team player impressed everyone who observed it. The final challenge of the field training was a comprehensive exercise that combined all the skills they had practiced: movement, communications, observation, and response to contact. Squad Bravo was tasked with a complex mission that required them to gather intelligence at multiple locations while avoiding enemy patrols and responding to various simulated emergencies. Sarah's leadership throughout the exercise demonstrated the growth she had experienced over the previous weeks. Her decision-making was confident but not rigid, allowing her to adapt to changing circumstances while maintaining focus on mission objectives. She delegated effectively, utilizing each team member's strengths while ensuring that everyone continued to develop new capabilities. The squad's performance was exceptional, accomplishing all primary objectives while successfully managing numerous complications and challenges. Their teamwork had evolved from a collection of individuals to a cohesive unit that functioned effectively under pressure. During the final evening in the field, as the squads prepared for the march back to the main training area, Drill Sergeant Rodriguez visited each group to provide feedback on their performance. When he reached Squad Bravo, his assessment was thorough and honest. "You've shown significant development as both individuals and as a team," he told them. "Squad Leader Martinez, your leadership style brings out the best in your people while maintaining standards and accomplishing missions. That's not easy to do, and it's exactly what the Army needs." He turned to address the entire squad. "Each of you has contributed to your team's success. Williams, your ability to step up when needed shows leadership potential. Kim, your technical skills and attention to detail have been valuable assets. Cohen, your physical conditioning and positive attitude help drive the team forward. Patterson, your knowledge and professionalism set an example for others. Thompson, your transformation and commitment to improvement have been outstanding." As they packed their gear for the return march, the members of Squad Bravo reflected on the experiences they had shared and the bonds they had formed. The field training had tested their individual capabilities while teaching them the importance of teamwork and mutual support. Sarah felt a deep sense of satisfaction as she organized her equipment and prepared to lead her squad back to the main training area. The challenges had been significant, but her team had responded with determination, adaptability, and mutual support that exemplified the best aspects of military service. The march back to barracks was conducted in formation, with each squad maintaining proper spacing and discipline despite their fatigue from 3 days of intensive training. Sarah set a steady pace for her team, ensuring that everyone stayed together while meeting the time standards for the movement. As they approached the familiar buildings of the main training complex, Sarah noticed a small group of senior military officials observing the returning squads from the steps of the headquarters building. Among them was an older officer whose presence seemed to command special attention from the training cadre. Colonel James Harrison was a distinguished veteran with over 30 years of military service, including multiple combat deployments and various command positions. He was known throughout the training command for his keen eye for talent and his ability to identify potential leaders among the thousands of recruits who passed through basic training each year. The colonel watched each squad as they passed, making mental notes about their bearing, discipline, and the way they worked together as teams. His attention was particularly drawn to Squad Bravo, whose members moved with the confident precision of a well-trained unit, despite their relatively short time in training. As Squad Bravo passed the headquarters building, Colonel Harrison's eyes settled on Sarah Martinez, studying her leadership style and the way her squad responded to her guidance. There was something about her bearing and the quiet competence she displayed that reminded him of exceptional leaders he had served with throughout his career. But it was when Sarah raised her arm to signal a column adjustment that the colonel noticed something that made him step forward for a closer look. The movement of her sleeve revealed a portion of the tattoo on her left arm, and what he saw made his breath catch in recognition. The intricate military insignia and the partial view of coordinates were familiar to him in a way that transcended casual observation. Those markings represented something specific, something that connected to events and people that had shaped his own military career decades earlier. As Squad Bravo continued past the building and toward the barracks area, Colonel Harrison continued to watch. his mind working through memories and possibilities that the brief glimpse of Sarah's tattoo had triggered. The coincidence seemed too significant to ignore, and he made a mental note to investigate further. Back in the barracks, the recruits of Squad Bravo went through their post-field training routines with the efficiency of a team that had learned to work together effectively. Equipment was cleaned and inventoried, personal hygiene was attended to, and preparations were made for the next phase of their training. Sarah gathered her squad for a brief after-action discussion, a practice that had become routine throughout their field training experience. These sessions allowed team members to share observations about their performance and identify lessons learned that could improve future operations. "What did everyone think about our performance over the past 3 days?" she asked, looking around at her team members. Marcus Williams spoke first. "I think we worked well together, especially when things didn't go according to plan. The casualty evacuation and the leadership transition both went better than I expected." David Kim nodded in agreement. "I was worried about keeping up physically, but everyone helped when I needed it. I learned that asking for help isn't a sign of weakness if it helps the team accomplish the mission." Rachel Cohen added her perspective. "The planning and preparation made a huge difference. When we took time to think through our options, we usually made better decisions than when we rushed." Amy Patterson offered a different viewpoint. "I was impressed by how everyone adapted when their roles changed. Jake especially showed a lot of growth from where he started." Jake Thompson looked slightly embarrassed by the praise but responded thoughtfully. "I learned that being part of a team is more rewarding than trying to prove how tough you are individually. Sarah showed all of us what real leadership looks like." As the discussion continued, Sarah reflected on how much the group had changed since their first awkward interactions during the initial weeks of training. The field exercise had accelerated their development as individuals and as a team, building confidence and competence that would serve them well in the remaining weeks of basic training. What none of them knew was that their performance had been noted at levels far above the typical training supervision. Colonel Harrison's interest in Sarah's tattoo represented the beginning of a discovery that would reveal connections spanning generations of military service and sacrifice. As the evening progressed and the recruits settled into their normal barracks routine, Sarah found herself thinking about her grandfather and the stories he had shared about his own military service. The coordinates on her tattoo represented more than just geographic locations. They marked places where decisions had been made, sacrifices had been offered, and legacies had been created that extended far beyond the individuals involved. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to demonstrate the lessons learned during their field training experience. But tonight, as she cleaned her rifle and prepared for another day of building on the foundation they had established, Sarah felt confident that she and her squad were ready for whatever tests lay ahead. The morning following their return from field training brought an unexpected announcement that would change the trajectory of Sarah's basic training experience. As the recruits assembled for the usual morning formation, they noticed that Colonel Harrison was present alongside Drill Sergeant Rodriguez, his distinguished bearing and numerous ribbons indicating decades of distinguished service. "Recruits," Rodriguez began, his voice carrying the same authority as always, but with an undertone of significance that suggested something important was about to happen. "Today marks the midpoint of your basic training. You've all shown growth and development, but some of you have demonstrated exceptional potential that warrants special recognition and additional challenges." Sarah felt a flutter of nervous anticipation, wondering if her squad's performance during the field training exercise had somehow distinguished them for better or worse. Around her, other recruits shifted slightly, each probably running through their own mental catalog of successes and failures from the previous weeks. Colonel Harrison stepped forward, his presence immediately commanding the attention of every recruit in formation. His voice carried the weight of experience and the confidence of someone who had led soldiers through genuine combat situations. "The purpose of basic training extends beyond teaching individual skills," he began. "We're identifying future leaders who will be responsible for the lives and welfare of other soldiers. This responsibility requires exceptional character, competence, and commitment." He paused, his eyes scanning the formation before continuing. "Based on demonstrated performance in leadership positions, tactical exercises, and overall military bearing, several recruits have been selected for advanced leadership development opportunities. that will challenge them beyond standard training requirements. Sarah's heart began to beat faster as she realized that this announcement might directly affect her future. The field training exercise had gone well, but she had tried not to get her hopes up about recognition or special opportunities. "Recruit Martinez," Colonel Harrison called out, his voice carrying clearly across the formation. "Step forward." Sarah felt a moment of disorientation as she processed the command. Moving with the precision that had become second nature over the previous weeks, she stepped out of formation and marched to a position in front of the colonel, coming to attention with perfect military bearing. Recruit Martinez has demonstrated exceptional leadership potential, tactical competence, and the kind of character that the Army needs in its future leaders, Colonel Harrison announced to the formation. She will be participating in an advanced leadership development program that will provide additional challenges and opportunities for growth. As Sarah stood at attention in front of the formation, she felt a mixture of pride and apprehension. Recognition was gratifying, but she knew that additional opportunities would come with increased scrutiny and higher expectations. Colonel Harrison continued addressing the formation while Sarah remained in position. Leadership development is not a privilege or a reward. It's a responsibility that requires continuous effort and commitment to excellence. Those selected for additional training will be held to higher standards and will be expected to set examples for their fellow recruits. After the formation was dismissed and the other recruits dispersed to their scheduled training activities, Colonel Harrison approached Sarah with a more personal demeanor. Up close, she could see the lines around his eyes that spoke of years of difficult decisions and the bearing of someone who had earned respect through demonstrated competence rather than rank alone. "Recruit Martinez, walk with me," he said, his tone still formal but less commanding than when addressing the full formation. They moved away from the main training area toward a quieter section of the base where conversation would be possible, without the constant background noise of military training activities. As they walked, Sarah maintained proper military bearing, while wondering what this conversation might reveal about her future. "Your performance during the field training exercise was exceptional," Colonel Harrison began. "Your squad's success wasn't accidental. It resulted from methodical planning, effective communication, and the ability to adapt to changing circumstances. Those are exactly the qualities we look for in potential leaders." Sarah felt proud of the recognition but remained focused on learning what would be expected of her moving forward. "Thank you, sir. I've been fortunate to work with an excellent team." Colonel Harrison smiled slightly at her response. "Giving credit to your team is another positive indicator. Leaders who understand that success depends on collective effort rather than individual heroics tend to be more effective in actual combat situations." They reached a small pavilion area designed for outdoor classes and meetings. Colonel Harrison gestured for Sarah to take a seat, then settled across from her with the relaxed posture of someone preparing for a longer conversation. "The Advanced Leadership Development Program will involve additional training in tactical planning, personnel management, and decision-making under pressure," he explained. "You'll be working directly with experienced officers and senior non-commissioned officers, who will provide mentorship and guidance beyond what's available in standard basic training." Sarah listened carefully, understanding that this opportunity represented a significant step forward in her military career development. "What will be expected of me, sir? Excellence in everything you do, continued development of your leadership skills, and serving as an example for other recruits." Colonel Harrison replied, "You'll also be participating in some specialized training exercises that will challenge you in ways that standard basic training cannot." He paused, studying her face as if looking for something specific. "There's another aspect of your background that interests me, Recruit Martinez. I noticed during yesterday's formation that you have a tattoo on your left arm. Would you mind showing it to me?" Sarah felt a moment of confusion and slight apprehension. Military regulations allowed for certain tattoos, and hers had been approved during the enlistment process. But the colonel's interest seemed to extend beyond simple regulation compliance. "Yes, sir," she replied, rolling up her sleeve to reveal the intricate military insignia surrounded by coordinates and dates. Colonel Harrison's reaction was immediate and profound. His professional demeanor shifted to something more personal as he leaned forward to study the tattoo more closely. The coordinates and unit designation were clearly visible, and his expression showed recognition that went beyond casual interest. "Where did you get this tattoo, and what does it represent to you?" he asked, his voice carrying a different quality than before. Sarah had not expected to discuss her tattoo with a senior officer, but his interest seemed genuine rather than critical. "It honors my grandfather's service in Vietnam, sir." The coordinates marked the location of a rescue mission where several soldiers were saved, but others were lost. He never talked much about the war, but in his final years, he shared some stories that meant a lot to me. Colonel Harrison was quiet for a long moment, his eyes studying the tattoo while his mind processed memories from decades earlier. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of personal experience. "What was your grandfather's name and unit?" he asked. "Staff Sergeant Miguel Martinez, 173rd Airborne Brigade." Sarah replied, wondering why these details mattered to the colonel. The effect of her words on Colonel Harrison was dramatic. He sat back in his chair as if physically impacted by the information, his eyes widening with recognition and what appeared to be emotional reaction. "Miguel Martinez," he repeated slowly, "from Tucson, Arizona. Joined the Army in 1967, served 2 tours in Vietnam." Sarah felt a chill of surprise. "Yes, sir." "How did you know that?" Colonel Harrison was quiet for another moment, clearly struggling with how to respond to what had become a deeply personal conversation. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of memories that had shaped his entire military career. "Your grandfather saved my life," he said simply. "I was Second Lieutenant James Harrison, fresh out of officer candidate school, leading a platoon on my first combat mission. We walked into an ambush, and I was wounded and trapped behind enemy lines. Your grandfather led a rescue mission that brought me and 3 other soldiers home." The world seemed to stop moving as Sarah processed what Colonel Harrison had just revealed. The connection between her family's military legacy and this moment was beyond anything she could have imagined. "The coordinates on your tattoo," Harrison continued, "mark the landing zone where the rescue helicopters touched down under heavy enemy fire. I was lying wounded in that exact location when your grandfather and his team reached us." Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes as the significance of the moment became clear. The stories her grandfather had shared during his final years, the mission that had haunted him throughout his life, and the coordinates she had permanently marked on her body represented not just historical events, but personal connections that spanned generations. "He never told me he had saved other soldiers," she said quietly. "He talked about the mission as if it had been a failure because some men were lost." Colonel Harrison nodded with understanding. That's exactly how Miguel would have remembered it. He blamed himself for the soldiers who didn't make it home, even though the mission saved 4 lives and prevented a much larger disaster. That's the burden that good soldiers carry. They remember their failures more clearly than their successes. He paused, lost in memories of events that had occurred more than 40 years earlier, but remained vivid in his mind. "Your grandfather was one of the finest soldiers I ever served with. He had the same qualities you've been demonstrating here: quiet competence, genuine concern for his fellow soldiers, and the ability to make good decisions under pressure." The conversation had moved far beyond the original discussion of advanced leadership training, but Sarah sensed that these revelations were somehow connected to the opportunities that lay ahead of her. "What happened after the rescue mission?" she asked, wanting to understand more about the events that had shaped both her grandfather's life and apparently Colonel Harrison's career. "Miguel completed his 2nd tour and came home to his family," Harrison replied. "I finished my tour a few months later and decided to make the military my career. Over the years, I tried to track down the soldiers who had saved my life, but military records from that era were complicated, and I never had success in locating your grandfather." He looked directly at Sarah, his expression showing the kind of emotional intensity that came from unexpected closure to long unresolved feelings. "I've spent 40 years wanting to thank him properly and never having the chance. Now I find his granddaughter in my training command, demonstrating the same qualities that made him such an exceptional soldier." Sarah wiped away tears that she couldn't prevent from forming. The pride she felt in her grandfather's service had always been strong, but learning about his specific heroic actions from someone who had benefited directly from them created an emotional connection that overwhelmed her usual composure. "I wish he could have known that you remembered him," she said. "He struggled with survivor's guilt from that mission for the rest of his life. Knowing that the men he saved went on to have successful careers and families would have meant everything to him." Colonel Harrison stood up and walked to the edge of the pavilion, looking out across the training areas where new generations of soldiers were developing the skills and character that military service required. When he turned back to Sarah, his expression had shifted to one of determined purpose. Miguel Martinez gave me the opportunity to serve my country for 40 years and to help train thousands of young soldiers who have gone on to protect freedom around the world, he said. Everything I've accomplished in my career exists because your grandfather was willing to risk his life to save mine. He returned to his seat and looked directly at Sarah with the intensity of someone making an important decision. I want to do everything I can to help his granddaughter achieve her full potential as a soldier and leader. The advanced leadership program I mentioned is just the beginning. I'm going to personally ensure that you have access to the best training and development opportunities the Army can provide. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was being offered, but also by the responsibility that came with such opportunities. Sir, I appreciate that more than I can express, but I want to earn any opportunities based on my own performance, not because of my grandfather's service. Colonel Harrison smiled approvingly at her response. That attitude confirms that you're worthy of the investment we're going to make in your development. Your grandfather's legacy opens doors, but your own performance will determine whether you walk through them successfully. He stood up again, indicating that their conversation was approaching its conclusion. Report to Lieutenant Morrison's office at 1400 hours today for your first advanced leadership training session. From now on, you'll be participating in specialized exercises and receiving mentorship that will accelerate your development as a military leader. As they walked back toward the main training area, Colonel Harrison continued to provide guidance about what lay ahead. The advanced training will be challenging in ways that regular basic training cannot match. You'll be making real decisions that affect real outcomes, working with experienced soldiers who will expect performance at higher levels than what's required of typical recruits. Sarah listened carefully, understanding that her military experience was about to change dramatically. The recognition was gratifying, but the increased expectations and scrutiny would require continuous effort to maintain the standards that had earned her this opportunity. One more thing, Colonel Harrison said as they approached the area where other recruits were engaged in their scheduled training activities. I want you to know that Miguel Martinez would be proud of the soldier you're becoming. The qualities you've demonstrated, leadership, integrity, dedication to your fellow soldiers, are exactly what he would have wanted to see in his granddaughter. The remainder of Sarah's day was filled with regular training activities, but her mind kept returning to the revelations about her grandfather's heroic service and the unexpected connection to Colonel Harrison. The other members of Squad Bravo noticed that she seemed distracted during their afternoon tactical training, but she wasn't ready to share the details of her conversation with the colonel. During the evening meal, Marcus Williams finally asked about her meeting with Colonel Harrison. "Everything okay? You've seemed pretty deep in thought since this morning." Sarah looked around the table at her squad members who had become more than fellow recruits over the previous weeks. They were genuine friends and teammates who had supported each other through the challenges of military training. "I found out some things about my family's military history that I never knew before," she said carefully. "Colonel Harrison knew my grandfather, who served in Vietnam. It turns out there are connections between past and present that I never could have imagined." Amy Patterson, with her military family background, understood the significance of such discoveries. "Military families have networks that span generations," she observed. "Sometimes those connections create opportunities, but they also create expectations. Either way, they're part of what makes military service special." Jake Thompson had been listening quietly to the conversation. "Whatever happened, you've earned everything you've achieved here based on your own performance," he said. "The way you led our squad during field training showed everyone what real leadership looks like. Any opportunities that come your way will be because you've proven yourself worthy of them." As the evening progressed and the recruits prepared for another night in the barracks, Sarah reflected on how dramatically her understanding of her family's legacy had changed in a single day. The tattoo on her arm had always been meaningful to her, but now it represented not just historical events but personal connections that linked her grandfather's service to her own military development. The coordinates that marked a landing zone in Vietnam had somehow led to a meeting with a colonel in North Carolina 40 years later. The rescue mission that her grandfather had always viewed as a partial failure had actually saved the life of someone who would go on to have a distinguished military career and who was now in a position to influence her own future. As she cleaned her rifle and prepared for the next day's training, Sarah thought about the responsibility that came with such unexpected connections. Her grandfather's heroic actions had created opportunities for her, but it would be her own performance and character that determined whether she made the most of those opportunities. Tomorrow would bring her first advanced leadership training session, marking the beginning of a more challenging and intensive phase of her military development. The standard basic training challenges had tested her individual capabilities and her ability to function as part of a team. The advanced training would test her potential to lead others and to make decisions under pressure that could affect the lives and welfare of fellow soldiers. The transformation from the recruit who had stepped off the bus weeks earlier to the emerging leader who would participate in advanced training represented more than just individual growth. It was part of a continuum of military service that connected generations of soldiers who had chosen to dedicate themselves to protecting freedom and defending their country. As Sarah settled into her bunk for the night, she thought about her grandfather and the pride he would have felt knowing that his granddaughter was following in his footsteps. The coordinates on her tattoo would always remind her of his sacrifice and service, but now they also represented the foundation for her own military legacy. The week ahead would bring new challenges and new opportunities to prove herself worthy of the trust that Colonel Harrison was placing in her development. The advanced leadership training would push her beyond the comfortable boundaries of what she had already mastered, forcing her to develop new capabilities and to demonstrate leadership potential under increasingly realistic conditions. But tonight, as she lay in the darkness of the recruit barracks, listening to the quiet sounds of her fellow soldiers settling in for sleep, Sarah felt confident that she was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. The foundation built by her grandfather's service and her own demonstrated performance had created opportunities that she was determined to make the most of. The Advanced Leadership Training Facility was located in a separate section of the base, away from the standard recruit training areas. As Sarah approached the building at precisely 1400 hours, she noticed that the atmosphere was different from what she had become accustomed to during regular basic training. The environment felt more professional and less regimented, suggesting that the participants would be treated more as developing leaders than as recruits requiring constant supervision. Lieutenant Morrison was waiting for her in a conference room that looked more like a corporate meeting space than a military training facility. Maps, tactical planning materials, and leadership development resources were arranged around the room, and several chairs were positioned around a large table designed for collaborative work. "Welcome to the Advanced Leadership Development Program, Martinez," Lieutenant Morrison said, his tone more collegial than the formal instruction style used in regular training sessions. "You're joining a select group of soldiers from various training companies who have demonstrated exceptional potential for leadership roles." As if summoned by his words, 3 other soldiers entered the room. Sarah immediately recognized that they were not typical recruits. Their bearing and confidence suggested more experience and maturity than the 18- and 19-year-olds who made up the majority of basic training participants. Lieutenant Morrison provided introductions that revealed the diverse backgrounds of the advanced training participants. "Sergeant First Class Williams is here from the Warrior Leader Course preparing for additional leadership responsibilities. Staff Sergeant Chen recently returned from overseas deployment and is cross-training for a specialized unit assignment. Specialist Rodriguez is participating in a program for high-potential junior leaders." He gestured towards Sarah as he completed the introductions. "Recruit Martinez is participating based on her exceptional performance during the first half of basic training, particularly her leadership during recent field exercises." Sarah felt slightly intimidated by the experience levels of the other participants, but she also felt honored to be included in such a select group. The opportunity to learn from experienced soldiers would be invaluable for her development, even if it meant operating outside her comfort zone. "Today's session will focus on tactical decision-making under pressure," Lieutenant Morrison explained, moving to a large map display at the front of the room. "You'll be presented with realistic scenarios that require quick thinking, clear communication, and the ability to balance competing priorities." The first scenario involved a squad-level patrol that had encountered unexpected enemy contact while conducting a reconnaissance mission in hostile territory. The patrol leader had been wounded, communications equipment had been damaged, and the squad needed to complete their mission while ensuring the safety of all personnel. "Martinez, you're the new patrol leader," Lieutenant Morrison announced, handing her a folder containing additional intelligence and resource information. "You have 5 minutes to assess the situation and develop a course of action. The other participants will serve as your advisors, but the final decisions are yours." Sarah felt her heart rate increase as she realized the magnitude of the responsibility being placed on her. This wasn't a training exercise with predetermined outcomes and safety nets. The scenario was designed to test her ability to make real leadership decisions under realistic pressure. She quickly reviewed the intelligence materials while formulating questions for her advisors. The situation was complex, with multiple competing priorities and limited resources available to address them. Success would require careful planning and efficient use of available assets. "Sergeant Williams," she began, looking at the most experienced member of the group, "what's your assessment of our options for completing the reconnaissance mission while ensuring casualty evacuation?" Sergeant First Class Williams studied the map and intelligence materials before responding. "We have 3 basic options. We can abort the mission and focus entirely on casualty evacuation, which guarantees the wounded soldier's safety, but means the intelligence won't be gathered. We can split the patrol, with some soldiers continuing the mission while others handle the evacuation. Or we can find a way to accomplish both objectives simultaneously." Staff Sergeant Chen added her perspective. "The communication equipment damage complicates everything. Without reliable contact with headquarters, we can't request immediate support or provide updates on our situation. That means we need to be self-sufficient and prepared for contingencies." Specialist Rodriguez, who had been studying the terrain features on the map, offered tactical insights. "The objective area has good concealment but limited escape routes. If we encounter additional enemy forces while completing the reconnaissance, we could find ourselves trapped with a wounded soldier to protect." Sarah listened carefully to all inputs while developing her own assessment of the situation. The advice from experienced soldiers was valuable, but ultimately she would need to make the decision and accept responsibility for its consequences. "Here's what we're going to do," she announced after completing her analysis. "We'll modify the mission to accommodate our changed circumstances. Specialist Rodriguez and I will move to the objective area to gather the essential intelligence, while Sergeant Williams and Staff Sergeant Chen establish a secure position with the wounded soldier and attempt to repair the communications equipment." She traced the planned movements on the map as she continued her briefing. "If the communications can be restored, we'll have backup support available. If not, we'll complete abbreviated reconnaissance that gathers the most critical information and return to the security position within 30 minutes. Lieutenant Morrison, who had been observing the planning session without comment, stepped forward to provide feedback on her approach. "Explain your reasoning for splitting the patrol and your contingency planning." "The split allows us to accomplish both primary objectives while minimizing risk," Sarah replied. "The wounded soldier gets immediate care and security, while the reconnaissance continues with a reduced but still effective team. The 30-minute time limit ensures that we don't get overcommitted to the intelligence gathering if the situation deteriorates." Sergeant First Class Williams nodded approvingly. "That's solid tactical thinking. You've balanced the mission requirements with personnel welfare, and you've maintained flexibility for changing circumstances." The scenario continued with various complications and decision points that tested Sarah's ability to adapt her plan while maintaining focus on primary objectives. Each challenge required quick thinking and clear communication with her team members. When the exercise concluded, Lieutenant Morrison led a comprehensive after-action review that examined both the tactical decisions and the leadership methods Sarah had employed. The feedback was detailed and constructive, highlighting strengths while identifying areas for continued development. "Your decision-making process was methodical and inclusive," he observed. "You gathered input from experienced advisors while maintaining clear command authority. That balance is essential for effective leadership in actual combat situations." Staff Sergeant Chen offered additional perspective. "Your willingness to adapt the original plan when circumstances changed showed flexibility and good judgment. Many leaders get locked into their initial plans and miss opportunities to improve their approach." The advanced training session continued for another 2 hours, covering leadership principles, ethical decision-making, and communication techniques that would be essential for future command responsibilities. The material was significantly more sophisticated than anything covered in regular basic training, reflecting the higher expectations for participants in the advanced program. As the session concluded, Lieutenant Morrison provided Sarah with additional materials for independent study and informed her about the schedule for upcoming advanced training activities. "You'll be participating in these sessions twice weekly for the remainder of your basic training period," he explained. "Each session will build on previous learning and introduce new challenges designed to develop your leadership potential." Walking back to the main training area, Sarah reflected on how different the advanced training had been from her regular basic training experiences. The emphasis on decision-making, critical thinking, and collaborative leadership represented a significant step forward in her military development. The other members of Squad Bravo were engaged in standard afternoon training when she returned, and she could see the curious glances directed her way as she rejoined the group. Her absence for advanced training had been noted, but military courtesy prevented direct questions about activities that might be considered privileged information. During the evening meal, Marcus Williams finally addressed the obvious question that the entire squad was thinking about. How was your special training session? Sarah considered how much she could appropriately share about the advanced program without violating any security or privacy considerations. It was challenging and educational, she said carefully. I worked with some experienced soldiers on leadership scenarios that were more complex than anything we've covered in regular training. Amy Patterson, with her understanding of military culture, recognized the significance of what Sarah was describing. Advanced leadership development opportunities like that are usually reserved for soldiers who have demonstrated exceptional potential, she observed. It sounds like your performance has been noticed at levels above the typical training supervision. Jake Thompson looked both proud and slightly envious as he processed the implications. That's outstanding, Sarah. You've earned recognition based on how you've led our squad and handled every challenge that's been thrown at you. David Kim, who had benefited directly from Sarah's leadership during their field training exercises, added his perspective. Whatever opportunities are coming your way, you've earned them by taking care of your people and accomplishing missions. That's exactly what good leaders do. The conversation was interrupted by an announcement that all recruits were to report to the main auditorium for an evening presentation. Such unscheduled gatherings were unusual, and speculation rippled through the mess hall about what might be important enough to require assembly of the entire training command. As the recruits filed into the auditorium, they noticed that the stage was set up with a podium and projection screen, suggesting a formal presentation rather than the typical training announcements or policy updates they usually receive during evening gatherings. Colonel Harrison took the stage along with several other senior officers, including some Sarah didn't recognize. Their collective bearing and the array of ribbons and decorations on their uniforms indicated that this was a significant event involving experienced combat leaders. Tonight's presentation will focus on the legacy of military service and the connections that bind soldiers across generations, Colonel Harrison began, his voice carrying easily through the auditorium's sound system. Military service involves more than individual achievement. It's about being part of something larger than ourselves, and contributing to a tradition of service that extends far beyond our individual careers. The presentation included historical examples of military units, heroic actions, and the way that lessons learned through sacrifice and dedication had been passed down through generations of soldiers. Sarah found herself particularly moved by stories about Vietnam War veterans whose service had influenced military doctrine and training methods still used decades later. As the presentation continued, Sarah began to understand that she was witnessing something more than a routine training session. The emphasis on legacy, service across generations, and the connections between past and present seemed to relate directly to her recent conversation with Colonel Harrison. The soldiers sitting in this auditorium tonight will carry forward the traditions and values that have been developed through the service and sacrifice of those who came before them, Colonel Harrison continued. Some of you may discover that your family's military history connects to current service in ways you never imagined. He paused, his eyes scanning the auditorium before continuing with what appeared to be a more personal message. Service members often tell me that their proudest moments come not from individual recognition, but from knowing that their actions have contributed to the safety and success of their fellow soldiers.